Um, Dear friends, I am very pleased to welcome you at the electronic presentation of our third edition of Brussels-Ukraїna Review. As you may know, the very first edition was published in December last year. It was a printed version. The second edition was published in April. It was electronic edition because of the situation with the pandemic. And the third edition, the July version, is published now. And I hope that you have received your copies already if you applied for these copies. If you haven't, you can still write us messages or emails on info@promoteukraine.org and we will send these copies to you. The journal is also published online, so you can come to our website and download all the editions we have. The next one will be in September, so you are welcome to contribute because this journal is made for you, for experts, for opinion leaders, for decision makers in the field of European integration of Ukraine. And we really hope to make this a platform for honest opinion exchange about the developments in the field of European integration and about your fears, whatever you see that is happening in the field of civil society and in public administration. I will not take much of your time now. I am going to introduce to you our moderator, who is a professional journalist, and we are very lucky to have her as a member of Promote Ukraine, Nadia Richardson. She will take my place, so please welcome. Natalia, floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Marta. Good afternoon. We would like to speak today about Ukraine and the European Union. You know that in this difficult time, let's say it like this, we have new opportunities in the next 6 months with the German Presidency of the European Union. We know that Germany is our big friend, and it's the third largest donor for Ukraine after the European Union and the United States. So, and we know that Germany will focus on many issues during its presidency, including Eastern Partnership and including Ukraine. And the main issues are Donbass and reforms in Ukraine. And we would like to speak about it now. We have here our members, our guests, and I would like to ask Anna Melenchuk, a member of Promote Ukraine, who is also a research fellow at German Marshall Fund of the United States and co-founder of the Institute of Innovative Governance. I would like to ask Anna to say a couple of words about this. The floor is yours, Anna. Anna. Anna Melenchuk.
Oh, now you can hear me. Sorry, I was on mute. Hi, everyone. If you don't mind, I will start from the digital agenda of the EU-Ukraine cooperation, and I will now share my screen. Please let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, we can see it. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so let's start. Ukraine has a lot to offer. We wrote the article together with Andrea Castagna in the third Brussels-Ukraína review. And the main idea of the article is that Ukraine has a lot to offer to the EU in digital and tech sectors, but Ukrainian digital assets are seen as a threat by many EU member states. Some of them see Ukraine even as a potential IT offshoring destination. It's not a secret that Ukraine is becoming a leader in Central and Eastern Europe in digital and tech. We have the fourth highest number of IT professionals in the world, friendly startup ecosystem, fast developing e-governance system. At the same time, the EU is losing to the US and China in digital and tech, and it should seek closer cooperation with its neighbors, such as Ukraine. For example, Ukraine can be a perfect spot for European IT companies to produce high-value software and hardware, but some common standards on transparency, digital taxation, and data protection would be needed. We also believe that cybersecurity can be a central issue of the Ukraine cooperation, as Ukraine has lots of expertise in fighting cyber threats. A permanent exchange of good practices in cybersecurity might be even a central topic of Ukraine's European integration. We have, of course, much more arguments developed in the article, and I would like everyone to invite to read it. Just to cut it short, if Brussels manages to benefit from Ukraine's digital proximity, its expertise, for example, in cybersecurity, which I mentioned, and if it manages to integrate Ukraine into its digital single market, it will strengthen European position in world's digital and tech sectors. I would be very happy to answer all of your questions which you may have on digital cooperation. Yes, that's a very short presentation from me. I'm not sure if you were able actually to see my screen, but I would be happy to share the presentation after the event, and would be happy to answer your questions. Over to you, Natalia. Thank you.
As far as I understand, digital agenda is a very important part of relations between the European Union and Ukraine now, and months and years as well. But Anna, I would like to ask you in this area, I mean, what can we do to accelerate our digitalization in Ukraine?
I believe that in Ukraine, today, we are doing well on digitalization. As I mentioned, we have lots of IT professionals, very fast-growing IT sector, very friendly startup ecosystem, English-speaking workforce. So I would say that Ukraine is doing quite well when it comes to digital and tech. And the idea here is that the EU, which is losing its competition to the US, to China, to some big players on digital, can learn from Ukraine in this sector. And the strengthening of cooperation between Ukraine and the EU would be beneficial both for Ukraine and for the European Union. And we are calling in our article, which you can read in the third Brussels-Ukraína review, we are calling the European Commission to come up with new initiatives on strengthening the digital cooperation with Ukraine and the European Union. It can be in the cybersecurity sector, as there is lots of experience which the European Union can learn from Ukraine. Since 2014, Ukraine was a target of large-scale cyber attacks on its infrastructure, and currently the European Union is experiencing similar attacks. And this is where the European Union would be able to learn from Ukraine. So it would be beneficial for EU member states. We see more opportunities rather than challenges in the digital cooperation, and we would call the European Union to come up with more initiatives integrating Ukraine better into the digital single market. And we are very happy that this initiative will be discussed during the next EU-Ukraine summit. Integrate also Ukraine better to the Digital Europe program and other digital initiatives of the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. As far as I understand, Andrina Jos from the representation of Ukraine to the European Union with us. Andrei, can you hear me? Can you see me? Andrei? No. Unfortunately, we cannot see him. I do not know what's going on because he
Yes, hello.
Okay, Andrei, sorry.
Yes, it's me.
I'm very
I'm
happy.
with you.
I'm very
Do you
happy.
see me?
No, I don't see you, but I hear you, at least.
Okay, but so why? I don't know why.
Okay.
I raised the hands. So
I see. Yes, Andrei, I'm very happy to see you. Andrei Najos, Counselor of the Representation of Ukraine to the European Union.
Okay.
I know that Andrei deals with issues of security.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting for us, of course. Andrei, can you say a couple of words, let's say not a couple of words, but can you say about priorities
Okay.
between Ukraine and Germany and the European Union during the presidency of Germany in the European Union, please?
Yes, hello. Do you see me? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I would like to promote Ukraine for this opportunity to express a couple of views on certain further developments of the EU-Ukraine strategic cooperation after COVID-19. And let me start by saying that the pandemic outbreak is not able to change the strategic basis of such cooperation and might only affect some tactical agenda, but not the substance of the cooperation. I am very pleased to stress that COVID-19 crisis demonstrates how deeply integrated we are and how important are our unity and solidarity with the EU. In my very brief presentation, I will concentrate on our political and security dialogue, as well as the EU non-recognition policy towards Crimea. It's also important not to forget about cooperation in the crisis circumstances as a natural disaster, which unfortunately often come to the Ukrainian soil. All those perspectives are developing on the background of the German presidency in the EU Council since July and December. And the assessment of the priorities of the presidency give me the right to confirm that Germany is eager contributing to addressing major conflicts in the Union's neighborhood and beyond. And Germany mentioned Eastern Ukraine. It provides for sure some window of opportunity for Ukraine in order to find the appropriate ways to de-escalate a tense situation on the Donbass. But unfortunately, this goal seems like a long perspective. And I have some proofs that just a couple of days ago, near Zaitsevo in Donetsk, just 40 kilometers from Donetsk, the Russian-backed separatists attacked the Ukrainian evacuation team. So we lost three people and servicemen. And so Ukraine proceeds from the premise that this mortal attack has all signs of war crime and was committed by the Russian illegal separatists. And the situation on the ground in Donbass still remains tense and fragile. All agreements aimed at improving of security on the ground reached at the Normandy format summits, as well as in the Trilateral Contact Group, remains unfortunately unimplemented. And therefore, Germany, as presidency country, faces such challenges. Such horrible things, we believe, also prevents Germany and Ukraine from getting success on the priority of the presidency, normalization of some relationship with Russia, because in the Germans' priorities, Germany also supports the High Representative in stock-taking process regarding the 5 guiding principles on the EU-Russian relationships in order to activate some shape of the EU policy. All those priorities were confirmed, by the way, by the German Foreign Minister, Heiko Maas, who communicated with AFET Committee on Foreign Affairs of the Parliament just a couple of days ago. And so this is our reality, and this is the priority. And now I slightly move to outline some tactical priorities of the EU-Ukraine cooperation. And I will dwell on certain very concrete topics which compose the whole puzzle of the strategic cooperation. And when I mentioned natural disaster, I need to remind that intensive rains during the June resulted in complicated flash floods in Carpathy region. And our state emergency service immediately communicated with EU Emergency Response Coordinating Center, and in a very operative manner, we conveyed the list of urgent needs for overcoming these floods. And we are happy because the assistance was immediately provided by the Commission, by Sweden, Italy, Denmark, Slovakia, and all those confirmed that in pandemic circumstances, EU is ready to react promptly on some such challenges. And we expect in the second part of the year, between Ukraine and Emergency Response Coordination Center, the cooperation will be activated. So the second point is the assistance from the EU to Ukraine in order to overcome COVID crisis. It's well-known fact that the EU provided 190 million of euro in order to implement some social and economic projects in Ukraine. The particular attention was paid to the situation on the east, because in April, the Commissioner Lenarčič, Commissioner who is responsible for crisis management, he allocated 13 million of humanitarian support provided to Donbass to rebuild the destroyed schools and to fix the problem with the water supply, which is really very serious in Donbass. Aid from the international community also becomes significantly difficult in the context of some closure of contact points and checkpoints on the temporarily occupied lines. And it was a problem. We also communicated with the Red Cross and UN different agencies in order to get the access to the uncontrolled area, in order to supply some assistance, some goods. And this question is on the EU-Ukraine agenda. European Union also provides support to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine into internationally recognized borders. And I would like to touch maybe just very briefly the human rights dimension, because on 15th of June, European External Action Service published annual report about human rights situation in the world in 2019. And we fully share some conclusions of the mentioned report, in particular to provide the unimpeded access of the international human rights mechanisms to regions temporarily occupied by Russia. And we believe that we need to have to build some human rights international corridor, I call it like this, to Crimea and Donbass, in order to bring human rights mechanisms from the Council of Europe, from the European Union, from the OSCE, from the UN on the occupied territory in order to assess the situation on the ground. I am also very pleased to say that the topic of Crimea remains on the agenda of the EU. And during the pandemic period of time, a number of important comprehensive EU statements were announced and published. So let me just say a couple of words. It's a 6th anniversary of the occupation of Crimea. We had a comprehensive statement from Mr. Borrell, High Rep, on the land ownership decree signed by Putin and affecting population in Crimea. After the attempted conscription of the young people in Crimea. After that, on 75th so-called anniversary of deportation of Crimean Tatars. And the last statement, very strong statement, was about the constitutional referendum conducted on the occupied territory. It's about the changes to the Russian constitution. So EU non-recognition policy is working properly, and there are no even tiny signs of some so-called erosion of this non-recognition policy under the circumstances of COVID-19. So about the sanctions policy, which is very well known and very sensitive topic. After COVID outbreak, the EU unanimously extended all packages of existing sanctions against Russia that proved unchangeable EU strategic approach towards Russian military aggression against Ukraine. Keeping EU sanctions policy in place, along with the political pressure on Russia, is an important tool to push Russian leadership to engage into the resolution of the conflict in Donbass and improve the situation in Crimea, and actually to provide some conditions for the occupation of Crimea. And summarizing my presentation, I would like to dwell on what else do we expect in the nearest future. First is the EU presence in the south regions of Ukraine, and we need that this presence should be increased dramatically. We are working with the EU in order to settle up the new field office of the EU advisory mission in Mariupol. Because when you remember the story when Russia attacked 3 Ukrainian ships in the Kerch Strait in November 2018, the advisory mission of the EU were deployed immediately. We assessed the situation on the ground, and we came to the conclusion that the presence of the EU in the region should be increased. And therefore, we hope that the new field mission, will be opened in September in Mariupol. We expect also that the EU special representatives on human rights, Mr. Gilmore, will visit Ukraine. It's first time in the history of existing such mechanism, which was settled up by Madame Ashton in 2012. We also expect Javier Borrell, who will come to Ukraine. I don't know, we don't know the exact dates, but we hope that
in March, but he rescheduled.
In March, but it was postponed in view of COVID. But we're still working on this visit. So high level, it's about disinformation. So we are planning to have EU-Ukraine high-level strategic communication meeting. It's important because the pandemic offers new opportunities for those who are eager to build existing disinformation narratives and spin new ones and undermine some basic principles, some values, some pillars on which the EU is based. We are also planning to conduct some EU-Ukraine consultations, its annual consultations about the legal consequences of the occupation of Crimea, and also third annual report about the visa-free regime, which was published recently. We assessed this report and we are going to implement some recommendations from this report. That's all from my side.
Andrei, thank you very much. It was really interesting. And I would like just to have a follow-up question. You mentioned Heiko Maas, the German foreign minister who came to Brussels recently, and he was speaking at the parliament at the Foreign Affairs And in fact, he said about priorities of the presidency of Germany, and he said about Russia and Ukraine, I will quote, "We want to prepare for the time when we could again talk more intensively about strategic relations with Russia, but warned that this would require certain preparations and explained that a solution in Ukraine is needed to change or restore the EU's strategic relations with Russia." So it sounds brilliant. I totally agree. My question is, do you think that Germany having these priorities, that Germany will be, I mean, because Germany is the president of the European Union, current president of the European Union, will the European Union be really more active in finding solutions in Donbass? Can you already feel that, you know, that this cooperation goes more active?
Yeah, so in this, when we are talking about the EU policy towards Russia, we need to base our assessment on 5 principles. I already mentioned these 5 principles, and so I printed out, and so it's very clear, you know, and the precondition for any restoration of the better cooperation between EU and Russia, the only one precondition is the full implementation of the Minsk Agreement. So we are working hard in order to activate our part of the team in the trilateral contact group, in the Minsk format. You probably know about the very difficult decision made by the President Zelensky to extend the presence of the Ukrainian side in the trilateral group. Now we have the head of the group, Vice Prime Minister, who is also the Minister of the Temporarily Occupied Territory, Mr. Reznikov. He is very active. We have some parliamentarian dimension. So we are doing something. We disengage on certain areas on the conflict line. We build it up, the bridge in Stanica Luganska. So our side is very active. But unfortunately, from other side, you know, because it's a move, it's 2 ways way. We cannot just do something from our side, and that side is keeping a silence. It's not the policy. So we are ready to implement fully the Minsk agreements, but everything now depends on the Russian side. If Russia does nothing in the framework of the Minsk, so I think that Germany will not have the success on the presidency in order to restore the dialogue with Moscow. Especially what we see, the changing of the constitutions, some recent attempts of some Russian Duma members to initiate some new draft law about criminalization of the political statements about the Russian territorial integrity. Because now we have the provision in the Russian constitution that any dispute around the land, which part of the land belongs to Russia or does not belong, so it might be the criminal offense, and it's a very serious case. It's the background on which we are dealing on a daily basis with this topic.
Thank you very much, Andriy. Can you stay with us a bit longer? Because I would like to give the floor now to Tanel Tan, member of the support group for Ukraine from the European Commission. Mr. Tan, can you see me? Can you hear me? Yes, brilliant. I can see you, but I cannot hear you because probably you should unmute.
Well, I think the host had unmuted me, but now I'm unmuted and everybody can hear me. Yes.
I can hear you, Mr. Tan. Yeah. I welcome you here, and please, can you say a couple of words about priorities during German presidency of the European Union? What does it mean for Ukraine?
You know, first of all, I'm so happy to speak after Andriy, with whom I worked together on Ukraine, I think, for last 5 or 6 years. And we share different locations, Strasbourg, Kiev, and also Brussels now. And always a very good colleague and very informed colleague. And I was quite impressed in his presentation as well, all the variety of topics and presented in a very clear manner. When it comes to German presidency priorities, I think I would not like to embark in a longer discussion on this, because I think this is more maybe a question to the German Ministry of Foreign Affairs or German authorities. But I think what I can say from our side, from the support group for Ukraine side, and I think this actually concerns all the EU institutions family, that Ukraine will remain on a very high agenda for the EU. There were already references to the EU-Ukraine summit. We are planning to organize this in October, of course, depending how the pandemic situation will develop. And we are currently preparing this internally. And obviously, then there are other formats like Association Council. Before the Association Council, there will be the presentation of Association Implementation Report and many other formats. Our cooperation, our relations are very, very close. So I think in that sense, this is expected to continue. I think that I would also like to say or reflect a little bit what Andri said about our engagement in the context of COVID-19 crisis. I think Andri was very correct to say that we have been the biggest donor to Ukraine in those very difficult times, 190 million euros where he referred to, but I think I should also outline the macro financial assistance that we are now that we have basically already announced, of course, provided that Ukraine fulfills certain conditions. But we are basically on the way to agree this with the Ukrainian government and then also make the disbursements based on the commitments and based on the agreed timeline. I think that on general issues, I would stop here. I mean, I could go on and have a long debate on many issues. I think all of the topics that were mentioned by Andri merit long and separate discussions. But I think that at this stage, I would not dwell longer on those issues. I had an agreement with colleagues of yours, Madam Moderator, before that I will speak also a little bit about the digital agenda and cooperation in this area. I don't know, should I do it right now or should I wait and other colleagues to react, or as you wish? I'm in your hands.
You know, just a short question about the summit in October, EU-Ukraine summit. We do not know how the situation will evolve with COVID, but if it's not possible to do it in Ukraine physically, will it be a video summit?
Well, I think that at this stage, I would not like to exclude any possibilities. Of course, the summit as such should be a physical summit. And as you probably know, 1 year it takes place in Kiev, and then other time it takes place in Brussels. This year it is turned for Brussels to host the summit. So the Ukrainian delegation should come over here and then we would have the discussion here. But of course, if the pandemic situation changes dramatically on our side, then this will have an impact. What I can also say is that we have already had some quite high-level Ukrainian representatives in Brussels recently. Vice Prime Minister for European Integration and Euro-Atlantic Integration, Olga Stefanishina, was in Brussels last week. And if I'm not mistaken, Andri can also correct me, Prime Minister Shmyhal is coming next week. So basically the visits in physical form already take place. And then when it comes to video meetings, I mean, this is really great thing for me. Right now, for example, I'm connected with you from Tallinn. I'm teleworking from Tallinn. I was in Brussels until beginning of July, and then I was granted this possibility to do a bit of teleworking. And actually, during the COVID crisis, the contact that we have had with Ukrainian interlocutors in Kiev has been even more tense because this format of video conferencing, video meetings has really enabled us to be very close to you. I mean, I know that you are now in Brussels, yes. but I think for us who work usually regularly in Brussels, it has really been great to be almost in a daily contact with different Ukrainian interlocutors. I work more on on issues related to digital, e-government, media, strategic communication, countering disinformation. So in those areas, very much contact, but I know that the colleagues working on other areas, it has been the same. And our acting head of support group for Ukraine and Deputy Director General for DG NEAR has also, I think, almost on a weekly basis in contact with somebody from Ukraine, participating in some event related to Ukraine. So I think our engagement it goes much beyond this 190 million or macro financial assistance. We are really very closely working together with you.
Thank you very much. Let's do the following. I have a question for Andriy.
Yes.
Answer this question, and then we move to the digital.
Perfect, perfect.
So, Andriy, there is a question from Irina Leroy. Thank you for the presentation, your presentation, Andriy. Dear Andriy, what is your future strategy towards Ukraine with connection of common security and defense policy? Andriy, we cannot hear you.
Okay. Yes? Okay. Yeah, thank you, Tunnel, for warm words. And yes, really, it's a pleasure for me personally to work on the daily basis with the SGUA. It's great to have, in the Commission, we can call it like a small MFA of Ukraine, because it's a very dedicated, very professional team who is helping us to implement internal reforms in Ukraine. And coming back to the question with CSDP, yes, it's one of the key priority for us. So we are now preparing the allocation of the appointment of one of representative from the Ministry of Defense to some missions in operations of the EU abroad, because it's critically important to restore the active participation of Ukraine in EU missions and operations in the different parts of the world. Such cooperation was suspended when Russian aggression started, because we needed to allocate all our military resources on the Donbass in order to defend the land, in order to fight with aggressor state. But now we are deepening cooperation. So we are happy, very happy that the head of the European Defense Agency visited Ukraine. We welcomed here the Minister of Defense, who visited recently Brussels, headquarters of NATO, and we also had some very good cooperation and contacts with the people from the EU side. So we have we are expecting that maybe sooner or later it was anticipated, the decision about the PESCO, about the structural cooperation. It's very important internal initiative of the EU will be extended for the third country. This decision is not adopted yet, but we expect that the decision will be made, and the new opportunity for the Ministry of Defense will be opened for cooperation.
Okay, thank you very much. And I would like now to present our next speaker, Anna Gubanova, a financial specialist at Tesla, member of Promote Ukraine. And I suggest the following, that Anna will say a couple of words about the digital agenda, and then we'll discuss the digital agenda also between Anna, Tunnel, and another Anna, okay?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? I'm not sure if you can hear me, yes?
Yeah, we can hear you, yes.
Okay, good. I would like to share my presentation with you guys, if it would be possible, and talk a little bit more about our digital agenda. But it doesn't seem that I can do it. Well, anyways, to start with, I want to thank Promote Ukraine for such an opportunity to write my articles for Brussels-Ukraine Review and to be present today at the presentation. And I would like to start with saying that IT industry in Ukraine is definitely moving very fast right now. It's developing, and I feel super excited seeing how much it's bringing to Ukrainian economy. In 2019, it brought $5 billion to Ukrainian economy, and it is expected to bring around 9 million by 2025, which I think is huge numbers. And I want to say that in my article, also in the second edition of Brussels Review, I talked a lot about the importance of governmental investment and the steps that the Ukrainian government needs to take and is currently taking in order to ensure that Ukrainian IT industry is prospering in the country. Only in the first 2 months of the new Ukrainian government, there were over 80 laws implemented in order to set the investment environment in Ukraine. And currently, Ukraine is ranked in top 50 for foreign investment and investment in digital technology on European continent, which I think is pretty huge. And I think that it is mainly caused by the level of very highly educated specialists in our country. Each year, our 400 institutions produce 35,000 IT specialists yearly, over 80% of whom speak English. And I think it's a huge reason to invest in Ukraine, and the progress that is happening is enormous. It is also expected that IT industry will uptake up to 5% of Ukrainian GDP by 2025. So I invite all the foreign investors, all the Ukrainian policymakers to put a huge emphasis on digitization, on investing in innovative startups and IT industry of Ukraine, because it is thriving. And if we look at the example of European countries of Western world, we can...
Technical problem. There is a technical problem with your presentation. Sorry, there is a technical problem. I do not know. Tanel, are you still with us? Tanel, Mr. Tan, I'm here. Okay, you're here. Okay, you can hear us. Okay, Anna, I suggest that you just finish your presentation, okay?
Yeah.
Shortly, and then we discuss the same topic with Mr. Tan.
Yeah, definitely. I completely understand that the time of digital technology is very rewarding, because we obviously are connected all in different countries. I'm currently located in Ukraine, everyone is everywhere, but there are some pitfalls to that. And of course, yes, that's the main summary that I wanted to make, that the industry is definitely evolving pretty fast, with also Western countries moving their R&D, research and development sectors to Ukraine. And the most recent and move, I think, is Google moving its R&D center to Ukraine, or starting, which I think is pretty great and huge, along with other huge companies as Microsoft, Apple, Samsung Electronics, IBM moving their R&D centers to Ukraine. We also will create a lot of jobs and specialists for development of better relations with EU and Western world in general, which I think is amazing. So this is a summary from me.
Yeah, thank you very much, Anna. It was very interesting. Sorry for this technical problem. There is a question. I do not know whether Anna or Tanel can answer this question. It's about cybersecurity. I do not know whether you're a specialist in this field or not. But there is a question from he's asking, 2009 Common Security and Defense Policy also includes security. This common security and to defend it that was done or will be done.
Yes. I mean, I will answer to that question as well, but maybe I will start a bit more broader context and then come to cybersecurity at the end. And I understand that there are also some other questions coming in. No, I think that what was just said is very important. You know, we have to recognize the progress in Ukraine in this area. Of course, one has to go and dig into the statistics, how much IT constitutes of the GDP, how many people are employed. I, at the moment, do not have this data with me, and sometimes also data is not really representing everything. I think it is a challenge. We have to really explore to also give a more sound empirically evidence what we are saying. But one thing is for fact that Ukraine has made tremendous progress in this area at the governmental, but also at the individual and business level. I was just earlier this week reading the new UN report on the digital transformation and electronic participation. And I think Ukraine is one of those countries who has progressed the most compared to the previous report. So this is recognized also by the international actors. And then, of course, everything that goes on in the country. I mean, this the DIA platform that was introduced to citizens in February, the way this has penetrated Ukrainian people, within Ukrainian people, within Ukrainian citizenry, it's amazing. I mean, with 4 months of using time, 4 million users, by this Ukraine has done something that no other country has managed before. Even comparing to Estonia, this is tremendous success and tremendous development. And I think also important to understand that this does not come without challenges. I mean, we are aware of some of the concerns that have been raised on the privacy, on cybersecurity, but I think that what is important is that also government understands those concerns. And also the fact, and this is maybe the third thing showing the commitment from the Ukrainian side in this area, is the position of the Deputy Prime Minister, who is responsible for digital transformation, and creating a separate ministry that is responsible for digital transformation. This will all contribute to the cooperation in this area, and also obviously to the Ukrainian digital leap itself. And I think also already now there are some things that the EU can learn from Ukraine, and not only Ukraine learning from the EU. Now, I think second broader issue that I would like to little bit discuss is what are EU and Ukraine doing in this area, and I think very important to mention that we have this very ambitious association agreement and deep and comprehensive free trade area between the EU and Ukraine. And in telecommunications sector, we actually offer to Ukraine a very advanced form of integration with the EU, which is basically an internal market treatment of the telecommunication services. And this is something that is not offered to basically any other country in the Eastern neighborhood. And this is for us a very strong motivation to encourage Ukraine to focus on implementing its commitments in the association agreement, because this internal market treatment does not come just by itself. Ukraine has to align its legislation, its institutional setup with that of the EU. Ukraine has to have a strong telecommunication regulator. Ukraine has to have a law on the electronic communications, which is in line with the EU acquis. Ukraine has to have a law on electronic trust services, which is in line with the EU. And of course, this is something that is ongoing in Ukraine right now. I mean, this draft law on electronic communications has been submitted to Rada, and Rada committee has been discussing it. I think it has already been adopted in the first reading with some substantial suggestions for amendments for the second reading. And the way EU takes this cooperation is that we have basically launched a multi-phase approach in order to support Ukraine in implementing association agreement. We have done an in-house assessment on the Ukraine proposal on how they want to approximate with the EU legislation in different areas. We have done an on-site assessment where we have basically assessed the legal gaps and institutional challenges. And now, as a third and fourth phase, we will support Ukraine in closing those gaps and building the institutional capacities. The third large issue what I would like to mention is our support. And again, I think that I have today already used so many times the words the biggest, the most, and the largest. And again, here I'm proud to say that Ukraine has the largest e-government and digital economy program in any third countries outside of the EU. So we provide 25 million euros to Ukraine in this area in I think initially in 4 years. And this addresses many issues from the e-government to the implementation of the association agreement, legislation, policy, capacity building, and even a bit the preparation of the broadband development projects. So it's a very big program. It was signed in February, and we are now negotiating with the implementing partners to actually launch the activities. Final point, I know that there was a question on cyber security. And cyber security is an area where we have worked together with Ukraine since 2015, December 2016, first half. Remember, there were big attacks against the energy infrastructure in Ukraine, in Western Ukraine, and then followed also with attacks against financial sector, and of course also WannaCry, a non-Petya. Sorry, there was a non-Petya in 2017. So basically, what we have done, we have scaled up our support. We have done this through different instruments. We have shared member states' experience. We have stepped up our support in the context of the elections, so cybersecurity of elections, and also connecting cybersecurity very much with countering disinformation. And I mentioned earlier the e-government and digital program. We have also a little component inside that program that could address cybersecurity challenges, both on the operational side, but possibly also on the legislative side. And then also we have an opportunity to bring in further member states' experience through the twinning project. Twinning is for us a modality when we bring in EU member states' experience in one specific area, then to be shared and work together with Ukrainian partners. Final point on cybersecurity. We discussed earlier the EU-Ukraine summit. In the margins of the preparation of the summit, we are now discussing very concretely about the possibilities to launch EU-Ukraine cybersecurity dialogue. This is what Ukraine asked last year during the association committee. And we are now so far that we are finalizing our internal reflections on this, and hopefully this will be then one of the EU-Ukraine summit deliverables that we will be able to announce that in a close future, either by the end of this year or maybe more realistically, maybe at the beginning of next year, there is going to be a EU-Ukraine cybersecurity dialogue. EU has cybersecurity dialogues so far with 6 countries: United States, Korea, India, Brazil, Japan, and China as well. Although I think in the case of China, it is called something else. Not I think it's called a little bit broader than just the cybersecurity dialogue. I think this is all from me now. I can also obviously answer to any questions if there are questions. Thanks a lot. And sorry if I was too long.
Yeah, it's a brilliant idea to have this cybersecurity dialogue with Ukraine. It sounds really wonderful. I would like to ask a very short question, and I expect very short answers from both speakers, from Anna and from Daniel. The question is, can Ukraine become next India? In terms of digitalization, of course. We cannot hear you. No,
okay.
You're...
I think Mr. or Madam Moderator is muting me from time to time.
No,
it's not you. It's somebody else. It's somebody else. No, I mean, on this question, whether Ukraine can be India, I think Ukraine can never be India. But Ukraine is already in many areas much more than India. Ukraine is Ukraine. So, I mean, this TIA thing, I mean, this is something that nobody has tried before in the world. This is something completely unique. And of course, many are watching how this will go. And I think even countries who are otherwise digitally more advanced than Ukraine, they will look at this and see how Ukraine is doing. And then, of course, the second thing, India does not have an association agreement with the EU. I mean, they do not have such an offer from us that we have, that you have. So I think in that sense also, Ukraine is much more. And maybe a third thing as well, where I think there maybe are some similarities, is the interest of the large, I would say, global competitors to the EU raising their stakes, like for example, China and Huawei. I think this is also something that we follow very closely, and we are aware that some of those developments may also have security risks for us. So when, for example, the 5G networks start developing in Ukraine, and this will definitely have an impact on the EU as well. So, I mean, I think answering, I understand where this question is coming from, but I think that Ukraine is too unique of a country to be compared to anyone else. Ukraine is Ukraine, and Ukraine should be proud for being Ukraine. Thanks. Thank
you very much. Anna, can you add something to this? Please?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that Ukraine is creating a very unique environment for entrepreneurship in general, not only big IT industry, but also for entrepreneurship and startups. And answering Irina's previous question, I also wanted to add that we already have such big startup players as Grammarly, GitLab, People AI, Allocate, different types of startups that already gather millions and millions in investment. And only in 2019, in venture capital investment, Ukraine, for the first time ever, surpassed $0.5 billion in gathering investment for startups, which I think is pretty huge and unique, because our product is being used everywhere. And also, as was already mentioned, Ukraine works very closely with Europe to allow for our regulations being developed, economic, financial regulations being developed in very close proximity and synergy, I would say. So I think it is definitely something unique, and I can see a very bright future for our IT industry, I'd say.
Okay, that sounds really, really nice. We hope that it will be like this. I do not know whether the next speaker, Dmytro Shemelin, is already with us or not. Dmytro Shemelin from Asters? Yes, okay. We welcome you, Mr. Shemelin, and I would like to remind you that our topic today, our main topic, is EU-Ukraine relations amid COVID-19 pandemic and disinformation. And we are speaking here about relations between the EU and Ukraine in the next, let's say, 6 months during the German presidency. Mr. Shemelin, can you give us, can you tell us a couple of words from your perspective on that topic, please?
So as far as I remember, you were asking me about the cases that we handle on behalf of the Ukrainian parties, because I am a counsel at Asters, which is a Ukrainian law firm, and it works, I work mainly in international disputes. Currently, we as Asters handle an investment arbitration case against Russia on behalf of Privatbank, the largest Ukrainian bank, for the assets expropriated in Crimea. We also previously successfully handled a case on behalf of Oshad Bank, another state-owned bank in Ukraine, again against Russia. But I understand that the participants are mainly interested in state-to-state cases. So I will make a little presentation on what kind of cases there are between Ukraine and Russia in various forums, which relate to Crimea and our kind of not so good relations between the two countries, unfortunately. So we do not take part in these cases, unfortunately, again, but I can say that the major two cases between Ukraine and Russia are now before the European Court of Human Rights. There is a case brought in 2014 on the basis of the alleged violations of human rights in Crimea. And it is a very, very broad case, alleging, I think, more than 10 different articles, including right to life, rights to be protected against torture, Article 6, right to fair trial, Article 1 of the first protocol on the protection of property against regulatory expropriation, and so on. So it is a kind of case Cyprus, I think, brought against Turkey several years ago, against successfully, and Ukraine is trying to protect the rights of its citizens in Crimea, which has been illegally annexed by Russia. So another case before the European Court of Human Rights is concerns the eastern territories of Ukraine, where the Russian military is now occupying and also causing damage to property of Ukrainian civilians, to various corporate rights and industry, Ukrainian industry, Ukrainian business, and so on. So this is the second case brought in respect of the occupied territories in 2016. Both of these cases are quite at an early stage. I think that in the first case, which concerns Crimea, the admissibility hearing took place in September last year. There is no judgment yet. And the second case is still kind of in the open as regards to admissibility. There are also, I think, 3 more smaller cases which are of less interest. I should also mention the ICJ case, the International Court of Justice, a large case on behalf of Ukraine on the basis of the financing of terrorism and racial discrimination conventions. It was again a type of case seen before. Georgia tried to sue Russia this way on the basis of these two conventions. Ukraine sued successfully. So I think in November last year there was a judgment in favor of Ukraine on jurisdiction. So the claims found to be admissible. Now we are proceeding on the merits, and the counter memorial by Russia must be filed, I think, December this year, which means that probably in 1 or 2 years we will have a hearing, and then obviously a judgment of the Court of Justice, which is, I think, a very promising and interesting development, because obviously the case concerns mostly the support which Russia gives to the various so-called organizations in the east of Ukraine. Ukrainian party, obviously, and I think fairly, calls this terrorism financing, and we would like to, Ukrainian party would like to have it stopped, obviously. Also, a significant part of this case is a claim for compensation of the damage caused by Russia as a result of the military action in the east of Ukraine. Finally, and not last but not the least, I would say, is a very interesting case. There are actually 3 cases, one of them the most interesting, on the basis of the Convention of the Law of the Sea. In, I think, 2017, Ukraine brought an arbitration case against Russia on the basis of that convention before the Permanent Court of Arbitration to kind of resolve the territorial dispute between the Ukraine and Russia concerning the Sea of Azov and the Black Sea and the assets of Ukraine in its territory, which is underwater and which is the exclusive economic zone. So this is again a very interesting case, and Ukraine have passed the jurisdictional stage. So jurisdictional objections in that case have been dismissed. So now we are proceeding to the merits, and I hope that in all actually of these cases, in the next 2 or 3 years, we might see the judgments, and obviously I hope they will be in favor of Ukraine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shumelin. I have a question for you. You mentioned big case. You were talking about that.
Yeah.
I would like to ask about small cases. If, for example, I'm a Ukrainian citizen and I bought, let's say, a house in Crimea in 2010. What happened? What can I do?
Well, actually, this is quite a common practice. You are not alone in this. There are, I think, according to the last statistics, about 4,000 cases concerning against Russia concerning damage caused in Crimea and damage caused in the east of Ukraine. The damage cases mostly concern the war in the east, because that's where the major destruction happened. In Crimea, there is a lot of regulatory expropriation cases. So Ukrainian business, for example, held some assets in Crimea, and then we all know that in 2014, some Crimean authorities, so-called, they kind of thought it is a good time to have something valuable, and they adopted a lot of individual acts kind of expropriating that property for the benefit of first Crimea and now obviously Russia. So now there are thousands of cases against Russia based on the damage caused in the east, or on the expropriation which took place in Crimea. Unfortunately, I would say there are also cases against Ukraine, because some people are not so patriotic and they think that it is perfectly possible to sue both Ukraine and Russia, for example, for the damage caused by military action. Well, it is obviously they are right. My personal position is that Russia should be responsible for this, but we should see what the judgment of the European Court will be.
Thank you very much. I would ask all participants that are with us now, you have questions, send this question if you want to speak something.
Yeah, I can see here Malaysia Airlines aircraft lost during 2014. How do you use this case to win against Russia? Well, the case in the ICJ, I think, lists Malaysian aircraft as one of the episodes, and it kind of because the case is based on the support that Russia provides to the terrorist organizations in the East. It doesn't, for the case, I believe, obviously this is not something I know very precisely because I don't handle that case. The support that Russia provided to the organizations by itself attracts international responsibility of Russia, regardless of whether Russian military directly took part in the downing of that unfortunate aircraft. Obviously, the position of the Ukrainian side, I think, is that Russian military did that directly, and Russia, therefore, should be responsible. But the way the case is phrased right now is that it doesn't really matter whether it was Russian military or it was Russian-supported local terrorists. So there is this is the bottom line is that this is already part of Ukrainian cases, and Ukraine will be seeking compensation on that in connection with this unfortunate events. But we all know that now in the Netherlands, the criminal case is progressing very fast, and we already have hearings. Unfortunately, it looks like they will be closer to the end of their case faster than the ICJ or the European Court of Human Rights. So I believe the position of Ukraine will be based on what the court will find in the Netherlands. But again, it's just my opinion because I do not, unfortunately, handle that case.
There was a follow-up.
Yeah. Has a direct information responsibility. Do you cooperate with Netherlands to support investigation, have advantage during the negotiations? Absolutely. Again, probably I'm not the best person to answer that because the cooperation between the Netherlands and Ukraine, it is handled now by the Ministry of the Foreign Affairs and the General Prosecutor's Office of Ukraine. There is a dedicated team of law enforcement officers in the General Prosecutor's Office, which is, I think, working round the clock to support the investigation in the Netherlands. You might know that recently there was communication between the Netherlands court and, the prosecutor's office of the Netherlands and the General Prosecutor's Office in Ukraine concerning witnesses which reside in Ukraine and must be interrogated. There was also a lot of communication concerning evidence. Unfortunately, the public, including me, is not very well acquainted with this because obviously this is an investigation secrecy and we do not know for sure what has been disclosed to the Dutch side and how often these communications happen. But yes, indeed, Ukraine takes part very actively in that investigation, and we also provided, I believe everything that the Dutch side asked us, including something that I know, including the electronic data from the how it's called, traffic management organizations, Ukrainian.
Mr. Shemin, last question. Do you feel that this COVID-19 pandemic has some impact on your activity? I mean, legal cases and so on. I mean, is it becoming more difficult to deal with that because of the pandemic?
Well, it's. I thought it would be worse, but it doesn't really affect the legal business a lot, especially in respect of hearings or something like that, because we can do that online now, as you can see, and I have had already hearings via Zoom or Teams call or something like that. Unfortunately, what I personally do not like is that the courts in certain countries, such as Cyprus, for example, they postpone the cases until after the COVID-19 period, which obviously delays a few of my cases in Cyprus and abroad. But the other negative side is that I cannot go to Europe, which is a pity, but everybody has to kind of share the burden.
Yeah. When you also come to us, we will definitely meet and talk about interesting topics. Okay, and let me introduce our next participants. I can already see that Taras Byk is there, Government Relations Director at Woodenhorse Strategies. I do not know whether Christina Parandi is already there. I cannot see Christina.
I'm here. Hi.
Okay. Okay. Christina Parandi is an analyst, and we will speak about reforms in Ukraine. Let's say in the last year, during presidency of Zelensky. Christina, the floor is yours, please.
Hi, thank you very much. And first and foremost, thank you so much to the Promote Ukraine team for organizing this reform, and my sincere congratulations for the third edition of the journal. So turning to a question about the reforms, I would say that I don't really see much of the difference over the last year and over the last 6 years when it comes to how the EU behaves as a reform actor in this whole story. Because the reform conditionality, which I wrote about in the previous edition of the journal, is an integral part of the EU's policies towards Ukraine since 2014. What do I mean under reform conditionality? So, of course, we have the broader relationship between Ukraine and the European Union when it comes to political support, the course towards approximation, the unconditional support in the fight against the Russian aggression. But we also have a separate track which concerns the exact conditions, basically the reform requirement, and they are laid out in some specific documents and programs that the EU has to offer to Ukraine. And those programs include, for instance, the state building contract, that was a program for budgetary support immediately after the revolution and the start of the Russian aggression. Then we had the visa liberalization action plan, basically one of the biggest achievements of the last years when Ukraine gained the visa-free travel to the EU. And we also have the programs of macro-financial assistance. And all of these documents have specific sets of criteria in different reform fields, which Ukraine has to fulfill before it can get additional access to EU assistance or funds or any other forms of political support. So in my last article, I analyzed all the requirements that the EU had for the anti-corruption reform in Ukraine. And I tried to draw the lessons why some of the reforms are more successful than in others, and what the EU and other Western partners can do to proceed with the same track and to avoid the backtracking on some of the progresses which already were achieved. So I wrote about the anti-corruption because this is the area which is most crucial, not only to the Western partners, but also to the Ukrainian society. But I believe, and you could probably judge, that the conclusions we can draw from the EU's involvement, they can be extended to basically any other areas in which EU is involved. So why some of the areas were more successful than the others? First of all, the EU managed to achieve more when it had the consistent policy from one program to another. And for instance, if it had a specific requirement which was not fulfilled, let's say under the macro-financial assistance, it would take the same requirement and continue pushing for that particular reform step by the government of Ukraine in the next programs. Secondly, this consistency also implied that these are not just technical requirements, let's say the establishment of the High Anti-Corruption Court or the establishment of any other agency or opening of the government registries, but these are not just the technical steps, but they're embedded in the broader aspect of the relationship between Ukraine and the EU. They are also part of the association agenda, which we already touched upon. and they are all subject to political reviews by the European Union on the annual or biannual basis. Thirdly, reforms are more successful, and I think this is exactly the case right now when we have some challenges and issues, when the EU acts in close coordination with other partners, for instance, the IMF or G7 group of ambassadors and countries, or the United States in particular. So basically, the more efforts are pulled together, the more successful the reforms are, just because the pressure and the leverage is higher. And finally, what the EU did really well is equipping the political requirements with the support for domestic actors on the ground who work in exactly the same fields. In the anti-corruption, it was most visible because civil society in Ukraine is quite active in that area. But when we talk about transparency of the governance at large, this is exactly the case whether you can empower domestic actors and then achieve the synergy with the domestic players on the reform field. Having said that, when we look at the situation right now, we are far from being complacent about Ukraine's progress. There are still some efforts to roll back the progress which already was achieved. There are also some pending decisions that Ukraine should proceed with to basically to prove that it's really a reformist in mind. And on the top of that, many people were doubting whether EU is still successful as a reform player because it lost its greatest leverage with granting Ukraine the Visa Liberalization Action Plan. So basically, what the EU can still do to push the government to really move forward with the reform agenda. But to be honest, since our discussion is also about the COVID context, it's exactly the case when we see that Ukraine needs the European Union not less than before. So with all the assistance which came from the EU, we saw that the support is crucial. And even though we have only macro-financial assistance, which are still left as conditionality programs, the broader political dialogue really relies upon Ukraine's fulfillment of its obligations before the EU and other international donors. So I'm more optimistic about this track. I still believe that the reform, although they face challenges, they are still subject to approval by the European Union and other important Western partners, and that the lessons which the EU could draw from its previous engagement, they can be used for the future relationship with Ukraine. Thank you.
Christina, thank you very much. I would like to ask you something. I read your article in the second issue of the magazine about corruption. It was really interesting. And my question is, okay, Ukraine is making progress in this direction, but how do ordinary citizens feel it? I mean, what does it mean in practical terms for Ukrainians? Does it mean that they do not pay bribes, that road police do not stop them? What's going on in this?
Please. Huh? Sure. I got a question. So obviously, all the aspects that you mentioned are concerning corruption, but we need to make this delineation between the high-level corruption, which is basically the corruption scheme run by the highest officials in the country. And we also have the habitual corruption, what you mentioned about the bribes and basically paying the doctor when you visiting him or paying the police on the road. And the latter one concerns the society at large. This is not something which, for instance, the EU can come and say we should stop that, just because those kind of changes cannot be imposed in the very short-term run, just because that was the part of the mentality for so long. But I do think that for ordinary citizens, it really means a lot when, for instance, they see the high officials which were involved in the high-level corruption are behind bars. So that's something most tangible. And this is exactly something for which the High Anti-Corruption Court was set. Because when the citizens would start to see that nobody is unpunished, that nobody can go, beyond what the law stipulates, they will try to impose the same standards of behavior on their daily lives. So answering your question, I think that the change should be initiated by the state as such to prove that we are corruption intolerant, that we wish to achieve the zero-level corruption, and then try to reduce the space for corruption in all the areas of Ukraine's life. This is also concerns the digital agenda, because as we know, when Ukraine moved to more public services online, there is less space for paying bribes for those services, right? when we moved to the public procurement via ProZorro system, we also lost a huge channel of corruption for procurement in public sector. So the same concerns the energy sector, banking sector, you name it. And the more sectors are basically subject to those transparency standards, the more feasible the reform would be felt by the Ukrainian citizens.
Thank you very much, Christina. And I hope that Taras Byk can join us. Can you hear me?
Yes, I am here. Can you hear me?
You. Wonderful. I read your article as well about reforms in Ukraine and about the current state, let's say, state of play in Ukraine. And I would like also to mention about a very recent article, literally 2 days ago. It was published 2 days ago by Razumkov Center. I do not know whether you read it. It's a report on Zelensky's first year, and the report was really critical. Nothing is fulfilled, no progress towards resolution of the conflict in Donbass, and so on. Really strong language. What can you say about the current situation in Ukraine, in reforms in Ukraine, please?
So basically, good afternoon, Brussels. Thank you, Promote Ukraine, for organizing the event. Basically, we can talk about both positive and negative things in terms of reforms in Ukraine. Talking about current authorities, we should remember that they came to power on the wave of populism. And while indeed populism nowadays is a big element of probably any political campaign, this political campaign was just full of populism. It was based on populism, which is obviously hard to keep to later to those promises if they are not realistic. The apogee of this reform, these promises were the promise to end the war by simply stop shooting. Now we have realized, and the authorities probably have realized, that by stopping shooting, the war doesn't end. It's much more complicated, and unfortunately, we have probably even more deaths on the front line of our heroes than we used to have in previous year. We have many setbacks, in different kinds of setbacks in other areas. For example, GDP is falling. Yes, indeed, GDP is falling all over the world because of the Covid-19, but in Ukraine, the decrease of GDP has begun well before the Covid crisis. So it was well after several months in power of the new authorities. We can see less trust of investors to Ukraine. A very notorious example here is the green energy sector, where investors came to Ukraine, they played according to the rules proposed by Ukraine, and then suddenly Ukraine has decided to change these rules. So this is another area which basically destroys trust of investors in Ukraine. If we are talking about successful reforms carried out in Ukraine, we can say that most of those reforms are kind of continuation of the reforms launched by the previous authorities. For example, if you talk about decentralization reform, which has begun one of the central reforms of destroying post-Soviet legacy, of moving Ukraine totally to a new structure of governing. So the reform was elaborated and was launched and was implemented by previous authorities, but this reform could not be implemented in 1-2 years. So that's why this reform is being implemented now as well. Even though there are different very vivid discussions today about aspects of this reform, but still it's going on and it's quite successful even today. Or if you take another example, which is so-called great construction, when President Zelensky announced that hundreds of kilometers of roads would be built, new schools, kindergartens, and so on and so on. But when journalists realized every specific object of construction, it turned out that most of them were launched by previous authorities, money were allocated by previous authorities, and this is simply continuation of previous authorities' works. However, there were few positive changes which can be attributed to the new authorities. And because during previous parliamentary elections, we had quite many progressive people who were elected to the parliament, and many high pro-reformist people who were appointed to new positions. In my opinion, the greatest example here is privatization. which was quite a failure under the previous authorities, but now it is a great success because there is a very strong young professional team in power in the State Property Fund of Ukraine, and they are organizing this privatization process. For example, just yesterday, the hotel Dnipro in the very center of Kyiv was sold, was privatized basically, and the starting price for this hotel was around 3 million USD, and it was sold almost for 40 million USD. So this is an example of successful reforms that are being implemented in Ukraine. And finally, since we are talking about European integration of Ukraine, we should remember that foreign policy of Ukraine and European integration policy in Ukraine is in good hands, because we have persons like Dmytro Kuleba as foreign minister of Ukraine, like Olga Stefanishyna as deputy prime minister for European and Euro-Atlantic integration, who are real professionals in their areas and who are very well respected in both among diplomats and experts. Despite all the problems we have today, I have strong opinion and still strong hope about ongoing reforms in Ukraine and about continuation of the European integration of Ukraine.
Okay, thank you very much. Do we have any questions from our participants about the current state of reforms? Okay, I have a question about the land reform. You know, do you think that it will really, let's say, increase the rating of Ukraine, of Ukrainian economy?
The land reform, this is the reform that should have been done a long time ago. And this is actually, surprisingly, this is one of the reforms which is not supported by vast majority of population, but which is not popular reform, but still it was implemented by the current authorities, at least it was launched. So now the big question is to what extent and how it is being implemented. So because even within this reform, to approve the laws is not enough. But still, this is very important first step to open the land market. And if it is properly implemented according to free market principles, not according to interests of some specific oligarchs or other people, then it will definitely contribute to the GDP growth of Ukraine.
Okay, thank you very much. I think it was very interesting, very useful change of opinions between all of us. But let's see. I do not see, unfortunately, whether we have next participants. It's Rika Zimmer and Nadia Halabulda. Yeah, I can see Rika. Hello, Rika. Yes. I cannot see Nadia. Nadia, are you here? Yes, I see you.
Okay, I'm there.
I'm glad to see both ladies. Okay, and now we will speak about Ukrainian culture. It's a dessert for today. You know, after all the difficult issues, we will speak about something that we really like. You know, it's about Ukrainian culture, and we will speak about Ukrainian culture, let's say, after Maidan, because there are definitely some changes in this direction. And first of all, I would like to ask Rika to start, and then Nadia will continue. Okay, Rika, can you say what changes we have in Ukraine, in Ukrainian?
Yes, of course. So actually the last article in the journal might be a bit something else what you would expect in the cultural pages about Ukraine. But first, I just want to shortly introduce myself and my co-author. I'm Rika, and I have my background in political communication and media in the University of Rotterdam and Amsterdam. And my co-author, who's actually my sister, Nadia Zimmer, she has her academic background in cultural studies. So this article is actually based on one of her previous works, where she studied the phenomenon of the rave, or in general, the phenomenon of the alternative club culture as a symptom of political and cultural radical changes, and used Ukraine, and more specifically Kyiv, as a case study, because this phenomenon actually emerged right after the events of the Euromaidan. So now, over 6 years later after the events, this cultural scene, which originally emerged from this rave culture, is known throughout Europe, or actually worldwide, and is even considered as a sort of business card of Ukraine towards young Europeans. And so now, of course, it is interesting to see how a cultural stream like this, which usually implies partying and celebrations, could possibly emerge from such a devastating situation as Ukraine has been in after the Revolution of Dignity and the following events. And for that, you first have to look at the young generation of Ukraine, because you don't have any other youth in Europe which you could compare to the young people that live in Ukraine and the situation that they are in, because their young years, their adolescent years, they are marked by political instability, by war, all at the same time while they're trying to just live a normal life and trying to work towards their own future, which many, of course, hope to be closer to Europe or to the European Union. So after the Maidan protests, the cultural life in Kiev, especially in Kiev, was basically non-existent anymore, which of course affects the young generation who just want to live a normal life and do what young people usually do. And what happened next in that situation is actually sums up the essence of the young Ukrainian generation quite well, because they took matters into their own hands and built something pretty amazing from basically nothing. And this is also very unique because this new cultural wave emerged from within the young population, and not, for example, from an institution like a cultural institution or something. So it's pretty much self-made, and it's also known for its do-it-yourself spirit, kind of. And it started with a very small group of people who just organized themselves and arranged the first events, with local talents in deserted locations such as bridges or old factories or warehouses. And these events were at first constantly endangered to be shut down by local authorities. However, the young people just continued to organize and going to these events so that this movement continuously grew. And two of the first events were the Schema events and the Closer events. And nowadays, both are world-renowned names and very well known. And for instance, the Closer is not only known for its events like the parties, but also is considered a sort of cultural haven. It's located in Kiev, I think close to the Podil district. And they also host educational lectures, exhibitions, discussions, jazz concerts, and so on. So quite soon after this whole wave of events and cultural scene started, young Europeans picked up on this because they were very intrigued by this new, authentic, raw cultural scene. So Kiev was actually very soon labeled as the new Berlin in terms of its club culture and in general in terms of its cultural scene. So with the rising popularity of the events, international media also picked up on this and promoted it even further. So for example, even beginning of this year in January, The Guardian called the Closer Club one of the best clubs in the world. So with this immense interest, especially young people from Europe, actually decide to travel to Ukraine to just experience it themselves, because this is such a unique phenomenon. Like I said earlier, it's kind of used to be compared to Berlin in the 90s, but this is something completely different because it's so raw and authentic still. Although now it's of course legal and a bit more commercialized, But yes, those young Europeans are traveling to Ukraine and get to interact with those young Ukrainians who participate in those events themselves. And they get to see the young Ukrainian generation, or get to see Ukraine, get to experience Ukraine a lot better than you would in news or on the internet or through politicians. And they see a generation which is holding closely together and just supports one another, values their freedom a lot, and is also highly educated and welcoming, while at the same time being very proud of their roots, but also looking towards being very oriented towards Europe. And this, of course, is not only a powerful tool for the tourism sector, but also in terms of the sort of cultural diplomacy. So there you would have the young Ukrainians. Yeah, you can maybe consider them even as cultural ambassadors towards other young Europeans. So yes, right now, of course, with the COVID-19 situation, there is little to no events going on, I would say. But this is exactly why it's interesting to further look into the development of this cultural stream, because I think I've read yesterday or the day before yesterday that yes, the cultural institutions or cultural life is going to be funded in Ukraine, or it's tried to be funded. However, those more underground movements showed already that they can sustain themselves without funding. So yeah, we're gonna investigate that further and see how this develops, and hopefully publish an article also in the Brussels-Ukraine review.
Thank you very much, Rika. And I would like to present once again our participant, Nadia Halabulda. If our participants already received our new of our magazine, you can see that Nadia is here. She's a Ukrainian designer. She makes Ukrainian vyshivankas, Ukrainian national clothes. That's also her sister, Marichka, who is, I think she's watching us from Australia. So Nadia was born in Belgium. She's of Ukrainian origin, but she was born in Belgium, and she's a very active Ukrainian activist, I would say. And I remember, Nadia, when I spoke to you, recently, like 1 month ago, you told me that you were really disappointed when you first came to Kyiv for the first time. It was ages ago, and you said everybody was speaking Russian, you know, I didn't like Kyiv, everything was so Soviet, was so pro-Russian and so on. What about now? I understand that you didn't travel to Ukraine recently, but in, let's say, last year or 2 years ago, do you feel that Kyiv became more Ukrainian? In terms of culture, in terms of language, in terms of everything?
It's a difficult question. The last time I went to Kyiv is 3 years ago. Last year I spent 10 days in Lviv, and I'm very in love with Lviv because Lviv is Ukrainian, it's Ukraine, and it's like coming home. My home is still Genk in Belgium. Kyiv, when we went there 3 years ago, we saw some different changes, the Ukrainian language and everything. Yeah, there are a lot of changes. I don't know how it is today, but I think there are changes. But the culture, I think that there is a big revival after the Maidan. The revival of Ukrainian culture, history, searching the roots, books, people write about the history, about collaboration with the KGB and National Socialism. I think that's very necessary because we have here in Germany, we have an example of their sorry, I haven't spoken English in a long time, about their history too. It's very necessary that young people are 30, 40 years old, they know about this history, and that they should know what happened, what was all hidden secretly, that people didn't know, things that weren't talked about.
Okay, thank you very much, Nadia. And we already have questions. Probably, if you can see them.
I'll try to open the chat.
First, the first question is, culture is behaviors, beliefs, values. What value you can offer to Europe? That was a question to Rika, please. Very shortly, please, Rika.
Okay, now you can hear me, right? Sorry, could you repeat the question again?
It's written there. If you can open the chart.
Yes, it's the first one, right?
Yeah, the first one. Thank you, Rika. Culture is behaviors, beliefs, values. Yeah.
Well, in the case of this for the younger generations, for this new stream, it's actually kind of all of this together. Of course, it is behaviors, beliefs, and values. And especially because it's concerning the young people, and you have to understand that this rave culture is a very open-minded and progressive culture. So that also means that the young people, the young Ukrainians, represent this very open-minded, progressive culture towards Europe as well. So like what I said earlier as well, then they are, if they serve as a sort of cultural ambassadors, this is like what they would represent towards Europe, towards the EU.
Nadia, I have a question for you, please. You live in Germany, in Munich, yeah? And do Germans know about Ukrainian culture, about vyshyvankas, about pisankas, and so on?
No, there is little known about. We are going to with my sister. She is a pisanka, and we are making exhibitions. And the first question when people come to our table is Russian, and then of course it's not Russian, but we try to explain this, and it's almost I think it's also post-Soviet. Everything was Russia in those times. People know. My colleague also said Ukraine wasn't known. Everything was Russia. So for people, it's Russia, and it's our job or our task or for the future to make things change and make more. Promote Ukrainian culture, not only by books, but with everything, because culture is everything. Language, but also with support of the government and governmental institutions and others.
Do Germans read? Do they have? Can they buy Ukrainian books? I mean, in German, but for Ukrainian courses.
In Germany, Yuri Androchovich, Kurkov, Jadan are very popular. Yuri Androchovich got the Leipziger Messe prize. He was honored. A few were nominated. There are books which are published, but it's not so very popular. And I know that the Ukrainian student organization, SUSN, they go and find those public little libraries where you can put books in. It's very popular here. And they try to put those Ukrainian translated books into those boxes. And one of the girls said to me, they take it and they read the books also.
It's already something, yeah.
But there's too not so much. It has to be more. I know there is an initiative from the Ukrainian embassy in Berlin. I should have taken it to show different regions of Ukraine, and in a forum of tricks, paintings, and then the explanation of what it is and what region you have, which celebrities, which writers, which Ukrainian statues, people, very important people, and so. And if those books could be published more and given away, it would help a lot.
Thank you very much. I think we had a very interesting discussion. I thank all the participants. I thank for all the questions, for all the presentations, and I hope that we will meet regularly, online or offline or both. We will see how it goes. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.